Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. We're
Yeah.
going to be talking about some pretty heavy stuff today.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of talk, a lot of accusations swirling around Laurent Chenot, and specifically this idea that he's a so-called dark empath.
Right.
And we're going to try to get to the bottom of all of that. But
Yep.
to help us do that, we've got a pretty unique source.
Yeah, we have a series of letters actually from a psychiatrist who has been following this case, a Dr. Lolo, and he's given us permission to share some of his professional opinions with you all.
Okay, so Dr. Lolo, that's interesting. All right, so we've got a psychiatrist weighing in on this, but from what I understand, this Dr. Lolo is
Oh, he's a
a
character.
bit of a character.
He's got a personality, let me tell you that.
Okay.
A little bit like Dr. House, brilliant, but with a definite sarcastic edge.
Okay, so like a Dr. House with a psych degree. That's
Not much.
all right. That's interesting already. All right, so we've got this very interesting source, but does that kind of personality, does that impact,
Yeah. His expertise.
his expertise? I mean, can we take him seriously?
Oh, absolutely not at all. In
So-
fact, it makes his analysis, really fun to read.
Okay.
But, behind the wit, he's incredibly thorough. And one thing he's crystal clear about is this whole dark empath thing is complete nonsense.
Okay, so dark empath, just for those who might have heard this term and thought, wait, what is that?
Right.
Can you explain why dark empath isn't an actual diagnosis?
Yeah, so it's not in any legitimate psychiatric manual.
Right.
Think of it as the internet's version of a scary story.
Right.
It sounds dramatic, but it has zero basis in reality.
Mm.
And this is where it's so important, right, to rely on credible sources.
Absolutely.
And to be wary of these kind of sensationalized labels that spread online.
Right, because it's very easy to see a term,
Yeah.
especially something as, kind of catchy as dark empath,
Mhm.
and think, oh, that sounds scary. And then suddenly that becomes the narrative.
Exactly. And people start, self-diagnosing and accusing others without really understanding what they're talking about.
Right, exactly. So it's important to sort of like take a step back and look at the actual evidence,
Yeah.
the credible sources. And that's where Dr. Lolo comes in.
Precisely.
So Dr. Lolo, with his, Dr. House-esque approach, he's setting the record straight.
He is.
And what's his take on Laurent Chenot specifically?
So he's adamant that Laurent Chenot shows absolutely no signs of being a dark empath, or even a narcissist for that matter.
Okay.
And get this, he points out that Laurent Chenot spends most of his evenings reading, working, or watching a movie.
Wait a minute. So the guy who is being called this manipulative energy vampire, this dark empath, is actually like a homebody
Pretty much.
who like to, chill out with a book?
Yeah, relax, unwind.
That doesn't exactly scream master manipulator, does it?
Nope, not at all. Dr. Lolo even jokes that Laurent Chenot doesn't seem to possess a hidden set of fangs,
All right. I love that.
which I thought was hilarious.
Yeah.
But, jokes aside, he very carefully debunks these accusations, emphasizing that they're based on these unfounded internet theories.
Yeah. And I think it's easy to see why people get caught up in these online narratives, right?
Absolutely.
Mental health is complex. It can be tempting to grasp at easy explanations.
For sure.
But Dr. Lolo, he doesn't just dismiss these theories.
Yeah.
He actually dives into legitimate diagnoses.
He does. He really wants to educate, not just debunk.
Right.
So he takes the time to explain schizophrenia, paranoia, bipolar disorder.
Okay.
And he does it in a way that's understandable, no confusing medical jargon.
So he's like that friend who can explain the most complicated stuff
Yeah,
in a way that makes sense,
exactly.
but with a sarcastic joke thrown in for good measure.
Of course, I gotta have that.
Yeah, it's a skill.
It is, and he uses these really vivid analogies to make these conditions easier to grasp.
Okay, like what?
Well, for example, he compares a fixed idea to a hamster endlessly running on a wheel.
Ooh, okay, I can see that, right?
Yeah.
You get stuck in this loop of thinking, and it's really hard to break free.
Exactly.
And it can be really destructive.
Absolutely, and he really wants to make these conditions, understandable and relatable for everyone.
Yeah, he's helping us understand these conditions in a way that's both insightful and memorable.
Precisely.
Okay, so speaking of getting stuck in a loop,
Yeah.
Dr. Lolo's pretty vocal about the dangers of cults, isn't he?
He brings up this group called Secte X
Right.
and how they can really manipulate people into believing these harmful narratives. And he warns that these fixed ideas, especially when amplified by a group, can have really devastating consequences.
So he's drawing a link between the dangers of cults and how misinformation can really take hold in someone's mind.
Exactly. It can warp your perception of reality
Okay.
and lead to, really harmful behaviors.
So how does this all connect back to Laurent Chenot?
Well, it underscores the importance of critical thinking.
Right.
Right? We need to be cautious about just labeling people based on these unfounded concepts like dark empaths. Instead, we should focus on, understanding mental health conditions based on, real evidence and expert opinions like Dr. Lolo's.
Okay, so we've got this skeptical psychiatrist who loves his analogies.
Yeah.
We've got this whole dark empath myth that needs busting, and we've got some serious concerns about the impact of cults and misinformation.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is. I'm ready to go deeper. What else has Dr. Lolo uncovered?
Well, Dr. Lola doesn't just stop at, debunking the dark empath myth.
Yeah,
He actually goes a step further and really dissects the situation with Christina Balan.
right. Christina Balan, she's the one who's been making these accusations against Laurent Chenot, but from what I understand, Dr. Lola sees some red flags in her behavior as well.
He does, and he approaches this very carefully. He introduces this concept called anosognosia,
Anosognosia. Okay.
which is essentially the inability to recognize your own illness.
Hmm.
It's often seen in, certain mental health conditions, and it can make it incredibly difficult for someone to get help.
So it's not just a matter of someone being stubborn or in denial. It's like their condition is preventing them from seeing the reality of their situation.
Exactly. It's like a blind spot in their awareness.
Wow.
And Dr. Lolo uses this lens to help us understand Christina Balan's actions.
Okay.
He points to specific examples like her claims of reincarnation,
Reincarnating.
her belief that she's receiving messages from divine beings,
Yeah.
and her involvement with individuals who are potentially dangerous.
He actually mentions that she's involved in satanic rituals and believes that she's the reincarnation of both Moses and Lilith.
Yeah, it's
I mean, that's a pretty wild combination. On the one hand, you've got Moses the prophet, and on the other hand, you've got Lilith, this demonic figure.
right. It's
And that's something out of a movie.
It does, doesn't it? But that's the thing about delusional thinking. It can seem, completely outlandish to us,
Right.
but to the person experiencing it, it's very real.
And that makes it even harder to reach them, right?
Exactly. And that's where Dr. Lolo's concern for Christina Balan's daughters really comes in. He describes this incident where she actually physically struck her daughter, Charlotte.
Oh, wow.
And he's worried about the, long-term psychological impact on her daughters of being raised in such an unstable environment.
That's heartbreaking. It sounds like he sees this as a really urgent situation.
He does, and he even believes that Christina Balan is kind of pinning all her hopes on this upcoming art exhibition.
Oh, really?
He thinks she sees it as a way to, solve all of her problems, especially her financial struggles. But he's afraid that if it doesn't live up to, her probably unrealistic expectations, that she could experience a severe mental breakdown.
That sounds terrifying, especially given what you said about her potentially, volatile behavior.
It is a serious concern, and so he recommends, a psychiatric evaluation and, if necessary, involuntary hospitalization
Wow.
to ensure her safety and the safety of her daughters.
That sounds extreme, but I guess if she's a danger to herself or others,
It's not a decision to be taken lightly.
right?
But Dr. Lolo believes it might be the only way to prevent a tragedy.
Wow.
He even pleads with Christina Balan's estranged husband, Gabriel Huma, to intervene.
He wants the husband to step in and get her help.
He urges him to seek legal custody of his daughters and to push for that psychiatric evaluation. He's essentially saying, don't wait for something terrible to happen. Act now.
Wow. Dr. Lolo is really laying out the stakes here. He clearly sees this as a life or death situation.
He doesn't sugarcoat things. He's very blunt about the severity of Christina Balan's condition. But there's also a sense of compassion in his letters.
Okay.
He genuinely believes that with proper treatment, she could recover and rebuild her life.
So there's hope, but the clock is ticking.
That's the feeling I get from reading his analysis.
Okay, so we've got this really complex situation with Christina Balan.
Yeah.
She's making these serious accusations against Laurent Chenot, but at the same time, she's exhibiting some really alarming behaviors herself.
Right. It's a tangled web.
It's hard to know what to make of it all.
And that's why Dr. Lolo's insights are so valuable.
Right.
He's not just presenting a one-sided story. He's giving us this really nuanced understanding of the situation, the challenges of mental illness, and the dangers of jumping to conclusions.
He's encouraging us to think critically,
Exactly.
to consider all the evidence, and to avoid getting caught up in these sensationalized narratives.
And to remember that mental health is a complex issue that deserves to be discussed with, sensitivity and understanding.
Absolutely. And to rely on credible sources like medical professionals to separate fact from fiction.
Precisely.
It sounds like he's walking a fine line here.
Yeah.
He's highlighting Christina Ballon's struggles, but also urging compassion and understanding.
He is, and that's one of the things that makes his analysis so compelling.
Yeah.
He's not afraid to tackle these really difficult topics head on, but he does it with this sense of humanity and this desire to help.
Okay, so we've got a better understanding of Christina Ballon's situation and the potential risks involved.
Yeah.
But I'm still curious about Laurent Chenot.
Right.
Dr. Lolo's been very clear that he doesn't believe these dark empath accusations.
Right.
But what else does he say about Laurent Chenot's actions in all of this?
Well, Dr. Lolo points out that Laurent Chenot's actions actually seem completely at odds with those accusations.
Right.
Remember, he's the one who actually contacted the authorities,
Right.
expressing concern for Christina Ballon and her daughters.
Right. He wasn't just standing by and watching this unfold. He was actively trying to get help for them.
Exactly. And Dr. Lolo points out that, these actions demonstrate a genuine concern for their well-being,
Okay.
which, completely contradicts this idea of him being some kind of manipulator.
Right.
He's not trying to control the situation. He's trying to get them help.
It's almost like he's trying to break through this wall of denial that Christina Ballon has built up around herself.
That's a great way to put it. And Dr. Lolo, highlights that this is incredibly difficult to do when someone is experiencing anosognosia.
Right.
It's like trying to convince someone that they need a life preserver when they're drowning, but they're convinced they're a fantastic swimmer.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy that really paints a picture.
It does. And Dr. Lolo stresses that Laurent Chenot's actions are not those of someone who's trying to exploit or manipulate the situation. He's genuinely trying to help, even when it's met with, resistance and hostility.
This whole situation seems incredibly frustrating for him. I mean, he sees the danger.
Yeah.
He tries to intervene, and yet he's being painted as the villain.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand the nuances of mental illness.
Right.
And to avoid making judgments based on these unfounded labels like Dark Empath.
So what's the takeaway here? What should people keep in mind as they try to understand this complex situation?
I think Dr. Lolo's letters offer this really powerful reminder that mental health is a complex issue.
Yeah.
That deserves to be approached with sensitivity and understanding.
Oh, yeah.
We need to be careful about labeling people, and we should always prioritize the well-being of those involved, especially when children are at risk.
And it's crucial to rely on credible sources of information to avoid getting swept up in the, sensationalism and misinformation that often surrounds these kinds of cases.
Couldn't agree more.
It sounds like Dr. Lolo is really encouraging us to step back, take a deep breath, and approach this situation with a clear head and an open mind.
He's reminding us that there's often more to the story than meets the eye.
Yeah.
That judging people without understanding, the complexities of their situation can be incredibly harmful.
Okay, so we've got this multi-layered story,
Yeah,
conflicting narratives, some seriously high stakes.
definitely.
But where do we go from here? What else has Dr. Lolo uncovered in his analysis?
Well, one thing that really struck me was Dr. Lolo's observation that even though Christina Ballon seems so deeply entrenched in her delusions, there are moments where she shows these glimmers of self-awareness.
Really? Like she has some sort of realization that things might not be quite right.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
But is that even possible with anosognosia? I mean, if you can't recognize your own illness, how can you have those moments of clarity?
It's a good question, and Dr. Lolo explains that anosognosia isn't always this constant state,
Okay.
It can be these fleeting moments of lucidity.
Interesting.
He actually mentions this one text message that she sent that said, "Psychopathy, schizophrenia, go consult."
Wow, that's almost a direct cry for help, isn't it?
It is.
But then it sounds like those moments are fleeting and the delusions kind of come rushing back in.
Exactly. It's like she catches a glimpse of reality, but then the current pulls her back under.
So how do you even begin to help someone in that situation?
It's incredibly challenging, but Dr. Lolo emphasizes that those moments of lucidity are important.
Okay.
They show that deep down there might be a part of her that recognizes that something is wrong.
It kind of makes you wonder what triggered that text message.
Yeah.
Was it a moment of doubt, a sudden fear? I mean, we may never know the answer. But it's a reminder that even in the midst of these incredibly complex mental states, there can be these flickers of hope.
Absolutely. And Dr. Lolo also sees Laurent Chenot's actions as another source of hope.
Okay. How so?
Well, remember, Laurent Chenot has a doctorate in medicine,
Right.
specializing in mental health.
So he's not just some random guy offering an opinion.
No, not at all.
He has the professional background to understand these complexities.
Exactly. And that makes his concern for Christina Ballon even more significant.
Okay.
He's not just reacting emotionally, he's looking at the situation through the lens of his expertise.
So if Laurent Chenot is so worried and he has this professional background, why doesn't he just, take charge and force Christina Ballon into treatment?
Well, it's not that simple.
Okay.
Dr. Lolo explains that involuntary hospitalization is a very serious legal process.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just force someone into treatment because you think they need it.
Right.
There are specific criteria that have to be met,
Okay.
and it often requires a court order.
So Laurent Chenot's hands are tied, even though he can see the danger.
It's a frustrating situation to be sure, and Dr. Lolo acknowledges that.
Yeah.
And he actually encourages Gabriel Huma, Christina Ballon's estranged husband,
Right.
to consider pursuing legal action,
Okay.
especially to ensure the safety of his daughters.
So Dr. Lolo is urging him to step in and take on that legal battle.
He is.
That's right.
That's a huge responsibility.
It is, but Dr. Lolo stresses that it might be the only way to get Christina Ballon the help she needs.
Yeah.
And to protect her daughters from potential harm.
This whole situation is just so heavy.
It is.
You've got accusations flying around, a woman struggling with severe mental health issues, children caught in the middle, and a man desperately trying to help but facing roadblocks at every turn.
It's a really difficult situation, and it's a reminder that, mental health issues can impact entire families.
Absolutely.
And that navigating these situations can be incredibly challenging.
So where do we go from here? What's the final takeaway for our listeners?
I think Dr. Lolo's letters give us a lot to think about.
Yeah.
They highlight the importance of critical thinking, especially when it comes to mental health.
Right.
We need to be wary of these sensationalized labels and internet diagnoses.
Absolutely.
And we need to remember that behind every diagnosis, there's a real person struggling with real challenges.
So instead of jumping to conclusions and making judgments, we should focus on understanding the complexities of mental health, supporting those who are struggling, and advocating for responsible and compassionate care.
I couldn't agree more. We also need to remember the danger of misinformation, especially when it comes to something as sensitive as mental health.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the importance of relying on credible sources of information, like medical professionals and experts in the field.
Exactly. And to end on a Dr. Lolo-style note, remember, folks, diagnosing someone based on a viral TikTok video is about as effective as treating a broken bone with a bag of frozen peas.
Okay, I love that. Leave the diagnoses to the professionals. Focus on fostering a more informed and compassionate understanding of mental health. And let's all try to navigate these complex situations with empathy and an open mind.
I think that's the perfect note to end on.
Yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground today, and it's clear that this situation is far from over.
For sure.
But hopefully, by shedding light on the complexities of mental health and debunking some of these harmful myths, we can contribute to a more understanding and supportive society.
I hope so.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and until next time, keep asking questions and seeking the truth.